Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Lee. I am Will Lehman's attorney. Will ran for president of the UAW in last year's election. He's a rank and file worker at Mack Trucks in Macungie, Pennsylvania. Will is going to talk about the lawsuit which we just filed on Monday in federal court in the Eastern District of Michigan, demanding that the UAW election be rerun with the notice of the election to every member, because that obviously wasn't done in the first round. There was 9% turnout. 1 million members didn't vote. Most didn't vote because they didn't even know that an election was taking place, because this was a deliberate strategy to keep the rank and file from voting for a candidate like Will, who actually represents the interests of the rank and file and not the interests of the corporations and the UAW bureaucracy. So, Will, we're going to provide some updates and information for workers who are watching this who want to know about your lawsuit. We've been receiving a lot of messages of support so far from plants across the country. But why don't you explain, the contracts are expiring. There's a new administration, they say, in the head of the UAW. So why don't you describe how you see this lawsuit, its timing, and its importance for the rank and file across the country?
Well, this lawsuit is a fight against the illegitimate election of a long-established bureaucrat, Shawn Fain, who only effectively received 3% of votes of the entire UAW membership to even seat him in power. And naturally, this lawsuit is a rejection of the complete illegitimate election that just was carried out, with the vast majority of workers and retirees in the UAW not even knowing that an election took place. It was a farce from the beginning, and it was intended to keep workers in the dark and just elect a new bureaucrat to lead the UAW in the same way that it always has been, or that it has been, at least for the recent memory of workers in the UAW. For example, the Clarios strike just ended and effectively was carried out no differently than any strike under Curry or any strike of the 2 out of the last 4 presidents that were convicted and sent to jail for embezzling our dues and taking bribes from the companies. The workers were isolated. They were left out on $500 a week strike pay, while Shawn Fain makes over $5,000 a week in his salary. And Fain thinks that that's enough money for these workers. And the reality is that workers were isolated and betrayed in the same way at Clarios that they were in the numerous strikes in the recent past of the UAW. This lawsuit is everything that my campaign can do to fight against the illegitimate election, and we're continuing to fight so workers can have a democratic say in this election. But I'll just end there.
Yeah, so in the election, there were 104,000 votes that were cast in the first round in the autumn of 2022. Now, you went into court in the Eastern District of Michigan in November, and you sued the Monitor and the UAW because there were already a lot of reports that ballots were not received, that they went to the wrong address, that workers who wanted ballots couldn't get them in time. What did you ask the court to do in November when you went to court, and what happened then?
Well, specifically, I asked the court to force the UAW to make known that the election was actually taking place to the workers. Many workers that we came across when we visited different plants during the campaign had no idea that an election was even going on. So naturally, we did everything we could to legally force the UAW to make it known to the membership, but that suit was denied by Judge David Lawson, even though he admitted that the system the UAW uses, the Lewis system, the local union information system, effectively cuts out the membership. And knowing that this system cuts out the membership, they still denied the suit, and effectively only 104,000 members even were able to, knew that an election was taking place and took part in it.
So the UAW bureaucracy used the local union information system, which probably a lot of rank and file workers who are listening don't even know what that is. It's the system that has been used by the bureaucracy for a long time to provide information to local officials from national headquarters. It's not something which has traditionally been used to communicate with the members. And so when we discovered that that was the main way that the notice of the election was being provided, it became very clear that the UAW bureaucracy wanted this to be an election that only the bureaucrats and their network knew about. This was an attempt to disenfranchise the rank and file, to prevent the workers from doing anything to disrupt the cozy relationship which the bureaucrats had and have with management, as you're describing in the betrayal, for example, of the Clarios strike. So, Will, there was a monitor, you made a protest to the monitor. Tell me a little bit about sort of the overall, if you had to characterize how this election was run overall, how would you characterize it?
Hostile to the democratic rights of all the workers in the union, to hostile to any kind of say that we have, intentionally keeping membership in the dark, and effectively cutting all the membership out, just as the Lewis system cuts the membership out. No different.
Okay. So we're going to be providing updates and information about this to workers as this goes forward. But some of what's already come out, some of the information that your campaign has already brought to light involves the role played by the law firms which were responsible for supposedly protecting the rights of workers under the consent decree, which was issued in 2021, amid the rampant corruption, systematic corruption in the leadership, which, by the way, is the only reason why there was a direct election in the first place. Will, can you talk a little bit about the role played by these law firms? Who are these law firms?
Well, the two law firms are Crowell and Mooring and Jenner and Block. They've represented multiple corporations that the UAW also nominally represents. So effectively, they've represented corporations that are hostile to the workers' interests. Jenner and Block represented GM in the ignition defective ignition case that saw the death of 100 consumers, and GM effectively got away with it. So these corporations are hostile to life of consumers, and they're hostile to the interests of the workers as well.
Right. So, and these firms have been paid about $6 or $7 million between the two of them, I think. Lawyers, who are billing at a very high rate, and whose workers' dues money is actually going to pay them. And they said after you protested about the low turnout that they weren't concerned about it, and that they actually wrote that turnout wasn't even that low. They said it's not even clear that turnout was low. And this is 9% turnout. It's the lowest of any national. No country has had turnout that low. I don't think, at least not in recent years. So yes, this was a total. And then the Department of Labor denied your protest, and they didn't even try to give you the factual basis. They just gave you, it was a 3-sentence decision, and it said, we'll tell you the reasons why at a date in the future. How would you say this, what does this show about how the entire political system treats the rights of workers?
Well, as I campaigned, I said that both parties of big business, the Democrats and the Republicans, don't effectively represent any workers' interests. The majority of the trade unions back the Democrats, and the Democrats back the trade unions as a way of effectively keeping workers under control.
And by the way, Will, not to interrupt you, but you got a lot of mailers from the UAW reminding you to vote for the Democrats in the midterm. So I don't want to get you off track, but what did that show about, their willingness to provide notice to you about the different elections?
Well, yeah, all of us got multiple mailers. I submitted at least 6 in evidence, of, the UAW being able to get out notice for the Democratic Party, the UAW being definitely campaigning for the midterms for the Democrats, but they effectively didn't want us to participate in any of our own election for our own sake. They don't want our interests represented. They want the interests of the Democratic Party represented. So effectively and naturally, I submitted this evidence to the monitor and to the Department of Labor, and this still wasn't adequate in their eyes, specifically because they're hostile to our democratic interests, just as the trade union is.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on right now. Auto workers are dealing with cost of inflation, fact that there's no COLA, fact that wages are being erased by inflation, the contracts that the UAW bureaucracy is bringing to them are, as at Clarios, basically wage cuts. How do you see this lawsuit as part of the struggle of the rank and file in preparation for what we're hearing about the transition to electric vehicles, the contract expiration, et cetera?
Well, this lawsuit is one part of the fight against what's going on here. It's just one part of getting workers a democratic say. Sean Fain has demonstrated that he's not willing to carry out a struggle any different than the ones Ray Curry did. And if we use Clarios as an example, effectively those workers were isolated. They were starved out on $500 a week, while Sean Fain makes over $5,000 a week. And effectively, no additional power was brought to their fight. The UAW forced workers to handle scab batteries in plants, multiple different plants from Jeep to GM, and effectively undermined the strength of the workers at Clarios. Now, this is no different than the UAW that effectively had us scabbing on workers at NRV when they were on strike in 2021, and we were directed by the UAW to handle scab painted cabs coming up from New River Valley Volvo. So effectively, Sean Fain has demonstrated to all the workers that he's not willing to do anything different than the previous union leadership. Strike pay was not raised anymore, and workers were isolated and betrayed in the same way that they were in the past. So effectively, what we need to do is take the power into our own hands on the floor in rank and file committees at every plant and force the stopping of these types of scab operations that bureaucrats like Sean Fain force us to engage with for the sake of the corporation's profits.
Okay, well, this is going to be an important element of that struggle, Will, as you say. And I just, to conclude, want to thank all the rank and file workers who submitted evidence to the lawsuit that you brought in November, who reported on the lack of notice that they were given or that was given to their coworkers. I think there was a survey that had the over 20% of locals represented. So this is a lawsuit of, by, and for the rank and file. Couldn't have even been, the information that's in it could not have been gathered without the reports from workers like you, those of you who are listening, and we want to thank you for that. This is going to be a collective effort, and we will keep everybody informed as this lawsuit proceeds. Will, is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap this up?
Yeah, it's only that, the situation that we confront is definitely hostile to every worker. I mean, even if you look at the recent weeks where a third of Americans were under poor air quality alerts, and we were forced into the plants, some with visible smoke. It's no different under Fain being forced into work in these hostile conditions than it was under Curry or anyone else. I mean, we were forced to work large part through COVID under Curry, and now Fain doesn't care that the plants are filled with smoke. I mean, there's lots of things that demonstrate, and just like the Clarios strike and the lessons from it, that Fain is no different a bureaucrat than Curry. This shouldn't be distressing, though, to workers. Ultimately, the struggles we engage in are going to decide our fate and whether we win or lose. And our organizational method does need to play a part in that, and our political perspective. So the forming of these rank and file committees to take an accurate measure of history and the lessons from it, not only from recent with the Clarios betrayal, but broader history even of the UAW and beyond worker struggles, needs to be done by the membership and needs to be organized. And that's in those rank and file committees. That's by building internationally with the International Workers Alliance of Rank and File Committees and taking an accurate, that historical perspective and advancing a fight based on it. So ultimately, the fight that we engage in is going to decide whether we win or lose, and we absolutely have the power to win